Welcome to Prose Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durrag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land that this podcast was created on.
Welcome to Prose Cons, Season 3. New year, new season, and 101
new
episodes.
Season. What year is this?
I know, isn't it beautiful that after the 100th episode, we just happened to get Season 3 in the new year?
That was convenient.
Some people might say, yeah.
No,
Look at that planning.
It was serendipity.
That was hard planning, and we stuck to that.
I don't ask anyone to go back and count the length between how many episodes are in Season 1 and how many episodes are in Season 2. They don't quite match up.
We can work on that. As ever, we're the podcast by emerging writers for emerging writers, because sometimes we feel like pros and sometimes we feel like cons. I'm your host for today, Paddy Boylan, and joining me are 2/6 of the Precipice Fiction team, Ali Burnham.
Hello, my name is Ali. I'm a screenwriter and novelist, and I'm getting better at saying that without feeling like a fraud. Because not only have I given a contribution to the new Mythic, a fantasy short story, but November this year, a historical novel will be coming out that I have written.
Yes, it will. This is the first time you've mentioned that, right?
I've been dancing around it forever. I'm like, there may be a book that exists one day, but I'm getting better at making it sound more real each time I say it.
And we're going to do a proper episode getting into that. We're going to
give
pick
you
your brain
guys
about
all
the
the
process.
dots,
And that's going to be really good. And we're all really, really proud of you. And Phoenix Raig.
Hello. Some members call me the sick sixth. They don't call me that, but I am sick today, so you get some special vocals. I'm Phoenix. I'm a freelance editor, both on Fiverr and outside of Fiverr. And I'm the founder of Bentlight Writing, and we're an international editing house that puts authenticity reading at the forefront. That's all I'm going to give today. The brain's not...
All-around swell guy.
Churning much out. Yeah, I'm a swell guy.
And I'm Paddy Boylan. As I mentioned, I'm a writing teacher, editor, and creative writer. And like all of you guys, working on my current story for... working title, The Newer Mythic, the anthology we've got cooking.
Oh yeah, I'm totally working on that. Side eyes for people who are just listening.
You know, even if it's just in your mind, it still counts as working.
Okay,
Thinking
good.
is working.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, it's definitely still in my mind.
Yeah, I never stopped working on it.
it.
Yeah. So, back in September, November last year, HBO came out with a particularly compelling single-season crime drama, one with, at its heart, an extremely interesting, attention-grabbing protagonist, powered by an exceptional performance by Colin Farrell. And that character was, of all things, of all the characters it could be,
Drum roll.
the Penguin, right? The Penguin. The hokey, silly, probably, I'm going to say one of the silliest, if not the silliest character from the back catalogue of Batman.
Oswald Cobblepot.
Yeah, Oswald Cobblepot. And Batman is known for having some really, really silly villains. But no, they plucked this one out and amazingly, miraculously, they made it into a really good, dark, brooding character drama that Ali and I...
Yeah, it was way better than it had any right to be. It was...
Any right to be.
Why was it this good? And we're here to answer that question today.
Yeah, we're going to unpick the Penguin.
I've got a lot of notes to throw away. I did searches on penguins. Look, there was once a fossilized penguin that was recently discovered that was about the weight of Shaquille O'Neal. The oldest known penguin is Waimanu penguin, but that's all meaningless now.
Yeah, see, anyway. Phoenix hasn't seen the Penguin.
I'm curious to see if they incorporate... I know he's a big fan of ornithology, so I'm curious to see how much due diligence they did with their penguin facts.
Thank you.
How much is penguin lore woven into the show The Penguin? It's an important question to ask.
That's a good one.
So Phoenix, he's not interested in birds. He's not an ornithological fan.
No.
Yeah, and there are no penguins in the show at all.
Whoa.
And what's the point of watching it, Paddy, if there's no penguins in the Penguin?
Colin Farrell in a fat suit, I guess.
Okay.
Some very compelling performances. So yeah, that's what we've got going on today. We're going to talk about HBO's The Penguin. Before we get into that, we're going to do the usual round and ask you guys what you've been reading or watching or playing. Phoenix, what have you been up to while you've been recovering?
Get a load of this. I've actually been listening properly, because I haven't yet, properly to the new Mythic. I've been listening through everyone's stories, because when the audiobook first came out, I kind of just went to my story to hear how it was, and then I put it down for a while. But I'm listening back through all of them, and genuinely, I know I'm like the most biased person out there, you're all very good writers. Like I
Good
was
stuff.
listening through your stories
Stuff.
and genuinely was like, damn, this is really good. Like this is very
What
nice.
an
I'm thoroughly
amazing
enjoying this.
quality.
This is so good. I know what happens, but still I'm invested. This is wild.
So long as you think that and my mum think that, I'm happy. Yeah,
You
that's
must have
all I
had some
need.
really good editors on it, eh, Phoenix, to get it up to that scratch.
Okay. Well, the new Mythic. Hint, hint,
Yeah.
audience, it's worth a buy. Ali, how about you? What have you been up to in the literary world?
Well, to sound nice and highbrow, I've actually been reading slash listening to The Odyssey at the minute. It's
Mm.
important that I feel like the world should know I started of my own volition getting across the Odyssey before Christopher Nolan announced he's going to be doing an adaptation of it. So when I saw that news come out, I'm just like,
is
oh,
he?
obvious. Yeah, no. How amazing is that news? He's
Ooh,
going
oh
from
boy.
Oppenheimer to the Odysseus.
Oh yeah, that's great. I
gonna
hope he
be
makes it
fucking sick.
really big and weird too.
Yeah,
Mm.
I think his plan is he's just taking several IMAX cameras and running around the Mediterranean for a whole year. So it's gonna look stunning.
Great. Oh, I'm very
Or
excited for
20
that.
years if he's going to do it accurately. So the movie could be a while away. But yes, my initial knee-jerk reaction was, oh, well, great minds think alike. Clearly I was inspired to start listening to The Odyssey. And then Christopher Nolan's like, oh, can't let Ali get a head start on this. I better make a film on it.
That's probably what happened.
That's probably what
Almost
happened.
certainly,
I
yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
I would say so.
But why I was inspired to get across it, oh, it was kind of twofold. I had downloaded both the Iliad and the Odyssey because I'd heard of this very interesting translation done by, her name is Emily Wilson. And I was reading an article about her in that essentially she has been the first woman to translate the Iliad and the Odyssey from kind of as far back as we can go. So I think there have been women involved in
Whoa.
translation before, but they are working from texts translated by men. Like they haven't gone all the way back, while Emily Wilson has gone all the way back. And
Right.
she had this philosophy of bringing her female lens to the translation.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of straight from
So
her.
cool.
Yeah, and she kind of explains why she's gone for certain word choices and why she doesn't agree with other word choices men have made across history. So it's just been really eye-opening for me about just really confronting how old the Iliad and the Odyssey is. Like you think you know what old is, and then you're like, oh wait, there were scholars in the Library of Alexandria that were studying the Iliad and the Odyssey for how old they were.
Whoa.
They were
Yeah.
ancient history stories to the scholars in the Library of Alexandria. So just recontextualizing that in my brain. And also, it seems a bit late in the game now, but I've been having an epiphany about how similar, I think in a really good way, my novel that'll be coming out is in conversation with the story of Odysseus and the Odyssey, and in kind of how Odysseus was the original trickster who was on a journey to return to his family. So I'm kind of gearing up to do my final pass of my novel. I've got to like lock it in by June. So I'm just reading it to absorb it and just kind of feel the vibes of the Odyssey, be inspired by it almost ahead of doing this next pass. So
Yeah, I like that.
really enjoying it.
That's very cool. Can you send me the name of that particular translationist?
Yes, I'll
'Cause I
say it
would-
again
or
for
translator.
our listeners. Emily Wilson is her name. But yes, even her introductions at the start are very fascinating because she kind of gives her, this is my stamp and my reasons why, and my interpretation of the text before you get into the actual poem.
Yeah, I love that.
So
For those who know,
cool.
Phoenix is very, very big into translation and language, right, Phoenix?
Yes.
So
Yeah, it's awesome. I love it.
So on reading material that is relevant to what we're writing, I have picked up a book by Arthur Haley called The Money Changers. I'm listening to it in an audiobook. It's written in 1975 and it's set in a big international bank. And I'm listening to it because the story I'm writing for the newer Mythic, the new anthology, is a business story. And halfway through, I've realized like I have no idea how these people talk. I have no idea like what the kind of dynamics are. So like kind of Googled what are the best business thriller books, and this one kept coming up.
Business
So
thriller.
so far it's great. The stakes are all just money and people's positions, and it's all just pissing contests, but it's engaging stuff. Yeah, Money Changers set in a bank. So far so good. I recommend it.
Love it.
With that, let's get into penguin territory. Let's begin. So
Let's go into the iceberg.
yeah, let's slide around on the ice. Ellie, what do you think of the penguin?
I'm so glad you asked. It's not like I have 3 pages of handwritten notes in front of me.
Same.
So essentially, it was very fun. Just to give the listeners some context, and Phoenix some context, is
please.
Paddy and I went to a concert not too many weeks ago, and one of the first things we kind of said to each other as we were catching up as friends was, "How good's the penguin?" And then we kind of grabbed each other's shoulders and like yelled at each other about how good the penguin was.
It was pretty fresh off watching it. Yeah, we had the energy. It's that good. It's
that good. But the best thing was we both kind of announced, "Oh, it's a masterclass. It's doing this so well." But then I proceeded to say, "It's a masterclass in plot, like story and plot." And Paddy goes, "Oh, I would have said it's a masterclass in character." Yeah. So just the fact that we've both appreciated it for being amazing, but for 2 different sets of things, has led us to this unique episode where I'm gonna like talk about all these amazing story techniques that I think that I saw playing out in front of me, that I just want to run through and gush about. And then Paddy can kind of come in and talk about just all the amazing things he saw that they were doing with character. Like, this is a show firing on all cylinders for it to be that good, just in different departments. And even we're mainly going to be talking about writing, but it's worth now just up front saying the acting is also a masterclass. Because I was watching this alongside Sugar, and it was so mind-bending to watch Colin Farrell in 2 shows, like 2 leads, and still not be able to recognize him as the penguin when it would.
Oh my gosh,
not at all.
He's just a different person.
I love a performance where you can see an actor do something you've never seen them do before. We have to remind yourself, like, oh, this is Gary Oldman. Like, it's not like the person on the screen I'm seeing. It's that kind of performance. He absolutely transforms himself. I know you said you can kind of see some small
I feel like every now and then I would see it in the eyes.
Okay.
And I'm like, oh, I've seen him like do that. I could see his soul every now and then, but it'd be like fleeting for a microsecond, and then he was the penguin again.
Yeah. I didn't say anything. I just saw Oswald Cobb. Speaking of Oswald Cobb, before you get into it, Ali, Phoenix, what do you know about the penguin? And spoilers, ladies and gentlemen, that we should probably mention there are going to be spoilers for the penguin ahead. We'll try to keep it just the pilot, but no promises. So what do you know about the character of the penguin, Phoenix? Or what do you think about when you hear it?
What I think about is a very, very pale, overweight man in some cold lair. I think my only exposure to him has been like, I think he appeared, was he in like one of the 80s Batman movies or the 70s Batman movies or something? He's in one of the older ones. And I just remember the set being very, Danny DeVito, I think, played him.
At some point.
So I picture he never attracted me as a character because he just seemed too over the top. I mean, granted, all characters back in like the 70s and 80s were like, let's recreate the comic book character almost verbatim. And it's just too loud and too caricature-y. And
it's a little dumb.
That was my exposure to him, as well as the Riddler, which was played by Jim Carrey. And even still, I was like, not for me. That's
very
too much.
Camp,
like,
right?
Yeah, just too camp. So Penguin and the Riddler both are just like very camp in my mind.
Okay. Because boy, have they left that behind.
Sounds like a very modern take.
Yeah, but while still, I think, keeping some of the core elements that make the penguin the penguin. They
all
haven't,
the recognizable traits are still there.
They haven't
minus
out
the
everything.
penguins. Minus
He's not surrounded by an army of
There's
little
no
penguins.
penguins.
Can confirm.
Okay.
Is that good or bad? We'll let the audience decide.
It was almost like, I don't know if you had this experience, Paddy, but towards about episode 6, I'm like, are they ever actually going to say the word penguin?
Yeah, and then they said it. They basically stood up and cheered.
Take a shot the moment they said it, and they save it for the penultimate episode. Someone finally says it, and it just like leaves you hanging. It's so, and then it's just a subtle throwaway.
It's been a minute since I've seen it now, but I remember them saying it earlier, like, "Oh, he hates being called that. Don't call him the penguin or something." No, okay,
no,
interesting.
It's like the first time it's uttered is like the penultimate episode. Someone just makes it as a passing joke, and I thought it's like he doesn't even recognize it. It's not a name that's ever been given to him before. That's my memory of it anyway. I might be wrong, but
is it framed as a prequel, sort of like a predecessor to, like, is it his early development?
Yeah. It's not actually. So the movie The Batman, his name Twilight, but we shouldn't recognize him.
Edward Cullen,
Robert Pattinson.
Robert Pattinson.
Yeah,
I just said his name from Twilight.
Edward, yes, keeping up.
Yes, Edward.
Robert Pattinson's The Batman. happens, that movie, and Colin Farrell's the Penguin is one of the like sub villains in that movie. He is in it briefly, he's amazing, and then he's out. Because the Riddler, funny enough, Phoenix. So no, have you? I would understand if you haven't seen this one because the two main villains are the Penguin and the Riddler, funny enough. Both done in a very super serious way. The Riddler's the main villain, and then the Penguin's just also on the side causing strife, but being amazing to the point there was an outcry after that movie where people are like, we would love to see more of Colin Farrell in the Penguin. And then this show is pretty much an immediate sequel to the movie.
Ah.
So it starts. So there's a newsreel at the start of the pilot episode, immediately after the flood, because there's like a big explosion and the city's devastated from the Riddler's plot, and this is happening immediately in the aftermath of the movie.
But at the same time, I think it kind of is an origin story because, slight spoilers, 3, 2, 1. At the end of the Penguin series, we get him becoming the Penguin. Like, there's such an obvious, like, oh, now he's transitioning into the character that we know. So it kind of is an origin story, even if it is a sequel.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a him coming into himself story, but
yes.
I guess he already exists as a bit of a power player in Gotham's underground to be enough of a nuisance to Batman. This is a villain who has already met Batman. Because
just to say quickly, like while we're on the subject, he doesn't. So classically, the Penguin wears a tuxedo and a monocle, and he's got his like cane, kind of ridiculous. And the whole series, I've managed to resist giving him that. But as a child, Oswald Cobb's favorite movie is Top Hat. This like big musical production where characters wear tuxedos and they have top hats and they twirl their canes. And you see this moment of him watching it as a kid, like starry-eyed. And you just know like, oh, wow, that's how they're going to work it in. At the very end of the show, when he's basically told like, you know, if you are going to work with the power players of the city, you need to dress up. He's like, oh, dress up, eh? And the very last episode, you see him in the tuxedo. And that's how you know like, now he's ascended to penguindom. to Max
put
Penguin.
On the suit.
Yes.
But even then, he's also like, I absolutely agree that he's carrying this old-timey taste from his mother. And we get a lot of lovely flashbacks with him as a child that are dramatic for other reasons, not just the fashion, but he's dressed up with a bow tie and everything as a child to say take his mother out on a date to a jazz ballroom and things like that. So you kind of see why that taste is so important to him. But then also in the pilot I've just finished watching, he's a very flashy person, even without the suit. So he's wearing like this bold, as he likes to call it, plum jacket in the pilot. And he has a bright plum car that's just outrageously purple.
He's got a color theme.
Yes, so he's already styling himself like in a gash. Is that a word?
Garish. But you're one letter off, so it's basically...
So he's obviously not a man of... He thinks he has his style, but you know, someone from the outside looks at it and goes, "Ugh." I don't know if you're pulling that off, friend.
Which is so perfect from a character that doesn't come from money. You know, like he doesn't know how the hoi polloi is supposed to dress. He doesn't know what the etiquette's supposed to be.
It's the Elvis thing, like that sudden rise into money that you just kind of...
Or
you're
the
like,
Donald
this
Trump
is a
thing.
style, yes?
I imagine that Batman does not actually make an appearance, or if he does, it's very little and like in the periphery sort of thing.
So I really admired this show. It never goes there at all. Batman is never mentioned. He may as well not exist. And to other people I've spoken to, they'll be like, I forgot it was Gotham. Like they're like, for so long, it just so effortlessly blends into what could just be either Chicago or New Jersey, that every now and then they'll make a Gotham reference and you're like, oh shit, we are actually watching a DC property. But otherwise you just completely forget, because the stakes, which is what I'll start launching into, and the like what's important and the goals that need to be achieved have nothing to do with Batman.
Which I personally really liked that it didn't mention Batman. Same with the Joker film. I think they mentioned Batman a few times, but as someone who's not really a Batman fan, that sort of stuff let me enjoy this. Like, let it stand on its own 2 feet. It's like, this doesn't need to be connected with Batman. It's good anyway. We'll do some throwaway references to Gotham, but it's not.
It seemed like such a deliberate decision was made to be like, no, this is a character that deserves his own world. This is a character study of him. We're
Yep.
not going to lean on any cheap references. We're just
Yep.
going to make this vehicle drive itself. And
Yep.
God, is it so
Love
good
that.
for
Oh,
that
it
decision.
really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. As a crime drama, not as like a portrayal of like a supervillain from a cartoon, but as a crime drama, it's really good.
I don't know. Have
Yeah.
either of you ever played Star Wars Republic Commando by any chance?
Yes, I have. Good game. Surprisingly good game.
A very good game. But one thing I loved about that game is that so for those that don't know, it's a very old Star Wars game from early 2000s, I think. But you play through the Star Wars world as an elite squad of clone troopers and
very characterful as well.
very characterful. But one of the things it does very well is it gives the player a really unique perspective on the Star Wars world, because at that point I was very used to seeing Star Wars movies or playing games as Jedi where you're just like this superhero essentially taking down all these things and like you don't think anything of them. And then you play this game and suddenly they're freaking out because it's like a super battle droid. Just one of them walks in and they're like, shit, we have to strategize, like get over there, do that. And it's this puzzle to take down just something you normally cut through in a second. And then you see their reverence for their rank and their military for like at the very end of the game, spoilers in 3, 2, 1. If you haven't played it, it's very old. But you get a hologram call from Yoda, and not even in person, just a call. He just pops up, and they're
The
like
Yoda?
freaking out. The Yoda, like their general essentially, or their highest commander, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is a big deal!" And it's only because you're the most elite squadron, and you've just completed a ridiculous task. So Yoda calls you, and I just love the perspective of suddenly the world felt so much heavier because you don't have this superhero looking down lens. You have this grassroots normal person looking up lens. And that's the impression the Penguin gets to me in terms of the world building it can offer Gotham.
I really agree.
Just while we're talking about Batman as cameo, maybe around episode 6, I was still asking myself that question. I'm like, are they suddenly going to throw a Batman cameo, if not reference at us? Like, I wasn't sure if they're going to do it. And because they'd done such a good job of immersing us in, like, unapologetically, it's about the lower class, the lower socioeconomic class of Gotham. And it occurred to me what such a villain Bruce Wayne would be to this story. And if they wanted to go there, they could absolutely exploit him. Like, you can see how he just is the incredible opposing opposite of Oswald Cobblepot, just a man who's grown up in inherent wealth and money and yet still chooses to give himself like all the problems in the world as opposed to someone like Oswald who's fighting tooth and nail for every small victory and just off in the backdrop of extreme poverty and disadvantage. I'm like, Batman is actually a horrendous villain to this narrative where Penguin is our hero.
I wanted to I so many times I forgot that. Okay, forgot's a little strong, but I wanted to believe that Oswald was going to be the good guy, that he was going to be the hero, because, you know, we'll get into this a little more. But
we will get into this, yeah.
So often they show him in, like, the best possible light, being like, oh, I get him. I know he's doing bad, but I get him. I get where he's coming from. Which just makes, like, when they finally do, like, the end, like, nah, he's a real bastard, like, all the more effective and painful. But yeah, right. I really wanted to root for him.
Since you've introduced that, I might start my spiel if that's okay, Paddy.
Yeah. Begin, please.
And Phoenix. So what I'm going to do for this section is, as I went and watched the pilot just today, so I could hold it nice and fresh in my mind. But all these techniques I saw used across the whole season. So I just want to talk out these writing techniques. I'll explain them in depth. I think I have mentioned them all to some degree in the podcast before, but I'll talk them out. I'll use the pilot as an example as when I saw them. And in particular, it is this idea that all these plot devices I saw in use were always in service of the character. So on what you were saying, Paddy, about the twisting an audience's emotions and wanting to root for him, I believe, I'd be interested if you have a similar sense, that every moment of story and plot is about manipulating the audience's investment in Oswald. Like, going back and watching the pilot and realizing how deliberate it seems, like the foreshadowing and level of detail that almost every choice is about that very intentional audience manipulation.
Okay.
So I will firstly unpack the tools we'll go through. So I think I've talked about try-fail cycles before. I've talked about them as these beat cycles. So having goal, conflict, disaster, and then you can have reaction, dilemma, decision.
Okay, so
And
goal,
it's just
conflict,
goal,
disaster.
conflict, disaster. Yeah.
And the other three were?
Reaction, dilemma, decision.
Okay.
I'll mention a few examples of this in the pilot, but I remember, I want to say it's around episode 3 or 4 in particular is when this really wowed me. It's an episode where there's a party on at the Falcone Mansion, and Oswald has to go there as like a guest, but he has the mission of he's got to get a guy out of the basement because the guy knows he's a double agent. So he's either got to like rescue this guy or just at the very least make sure that information doesn't make it to the Falcones. And there's a series of try-fail cycles the entire episode, just mini obstacles where
yes.
I feel like I almost want to put money on the fact that someone in that writer's room must be a D&D fan, because it felt like everything was like an encounter where he would have to roll for initiative, or like the Pokemon music starts as he would walk into a new problem. He would have to pick a trait and get ready to roll his die. So it was just so wonderful how it kept evolving. So I'll talk through try-fail cycles. What it also would do is use those cycles to, it was constantly shifting context throughout the whole season. So there's not too many examples of this in the pilot because the pilot is all about giving us context so then the series can launch. But what, I'll mention this as I go, but later in the season, we get more and more context on Oswald as a character, that if we come to have an opinion of him, and so we're like, I am this invested in Oswald because I have seen him do these things. But then we get, say, the flashbacks, information from the mother, that we then have new context and a new framing to look at Oswald that changes our view of him.
It does it so well and so many times, and every time it's like a magic trick happening.
Yes, it's the very intentional manipulation of our relationship to Oswald. So again, that's why I'm like, I feel like everything comes back to that. So it's the revealing back of context that almost drives the plot at some points that I love. And I'll also talk about a little bit about raising stakes. So where it'll tell us this is the most dramatic thing that'll happen. And then the stakes will change. And it's like, oh, something else is now at stake. And it does this by changing our investment. And the very simple go-tos are the introduction of Vic. And the more we invest in Vic and the relationship between Oswald and Vic, the stakes are getting higher. And then the mother's also another character.
Just quickly, Vic is a young man, a homeless kid, made homeless by the kind of flood deluge from the explosion that the Riddler caused. He's this like sweet, innocent kid. He's involved in some crime, but like, that's not him. He basically gets indebted to Oswald Cobb, and Oswald Cobb says, I'm going to take you under my wing. I'm going to show you the way of the world. So he almost acts as, I think, Oswald's conscience through a lot of it. Or the good side of Oswald. He's like the one good thing that Oswald does.
And I guess what I love, and then talking about how to view the season, once you've gone all the way to the end, and so you have full context and you know where the ending is, going back and watching the pilot like I did today, with that framing in mind, it just made it how clear that you can read the whole thing as a pure manipulation as well. And, so I know I keep saying spoilers, I'll dive into that, but I'm just doing the headliners first. And then the last thing is character sliders. I think I've mentioned character sliders before, but it's this idea that you can measure a character or choose to design a character through how competent they are, how proactive they are, and how likable they are. So with these 3 sliders are your dynamic tools through which you can set your characters. But I thought the Penguin's actually doing quite a masterclass of almost every scene adjusts these sliders of Oswald.
I haven't encountered this idea of character sliders before, but I'm really impressed at the idea that you can just have 3. Obviously, there's more to character building than that, but just these 3 sliders can give rise to so much. I'm interested to learn. I'm looking forward to learning, Ali.
Yeah, all right. I'm about to dive into my deeper breakdown then. So essentially, try-fail cycles, context evolution, and the character sliders are all being used to deepen an audience's investment in Oswald. I believe the writers in the writer's room have chosen to weigh audience investment above all else
Mhm.
because I felt the show ultimately was asking the audience, is this a man you care about? Is he worthy of sympathy? Is
Yeah.
he worthy to root for? Do you enjoy watching him succeed? And hook, like, and sinker, your relationship, like audience relationship, is the question that will evolve. And right up until the end, we'll keep twisting and turning right into the finale. So it's you and Oswald, I feel like, was the intentional what they're honing towards.
Yes. I agree with 100% of what you've said so far. This thesis makes sense to me.
The audience will go on this journey and it's mapped to perfection. So this is me just
Gushing.
gloriously celebrating
Yeah.
the craft of it. The show manipulates you just the way a narcissist would manipulate someone else.
That's the bombshell of the episode. I love that. I
Mm.
love that.
And when that clicked together for me, I realized that a plot is a mirror of the theme. Like the structure
That's so
itself is the message of the show. And I'm
That's
just like,
so cool.
how beautiful to be able to use that craft tool in that way. And I feel like I could say I have seen that done before, where the plot is an echo of the theme again. But why I want to celebrate the plot of this in particular is it was a wonderful TV example of this, and I don't see it done in TV too often.
No.
It's like unreliable narrator, but unreliable lens instead, where they're
Yes.
showing you strategic things
Yes.
to paint a particular view, and you are the narcissist's victim.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes, because that's what I mean by the whole context reveal is so intentional that you're only going to get the mother's perspective later on, where you've
Yeah.
already formed an opinion of Oswald, like Paddy is saying. He's like, he's the good sides of him. This was what I was rooting for him.
I
But then
wanted
you
them. I
kind of
wanted
get the
that so hard.
context was, oh, maybe he has been a psychopathic narcissist since a child. And
Yeah.
it's not even a maybe.
Wow.
That's like certain. You're like, this is my new understanding of him
And
the
on
entire time.
character, real quick, a note that I had on his character is there really isn't. He doesn't really have a character arc. At the end, he becomes full penguin, but before then, he's pretty much just the same guy. There's not even great changes in his amount of power. He gains and loses little bits of power. But I think what there is instead is almost like an audience information arc. What changes
Yes.
is our understanding of the
Yes.
character, our knowledge of him. So we learn new things about him, but we also learn new ways to interpret his past actions, which is interesting because, like,
Wow.
they've essentially written a character without an arc, but you don't care because it's really,
Yes.
really good.
That's
the audience
so
information
cool.
arc. I'm gonna call it that. There's probably a better
Yeah.
term out there, but
It's a disguised character arc. You think, and that's the perfect way to do a narcissist. You think they're changing,
Yes.
and it's like, oh shit, no, you, the audience, are in a toxic relationship. Get out. Like,
it's a good show.
With
Phoenix.
Oswald
that's
Cobblepot.
really cool.
Yes.
With Oswald
You-
Cobblepot, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely it. You kind of realize he has always been this way. The moments of growth we can reflect on and see were because the whole time you can kind of see, oh yeah, he's playing the field to his advantage. You can see he's doing that because it will
But you
logically
understand
help him. But you
why.
see,
He's a survivor. The world's crooked. He has to be crooked too.
you make all these excuses for him, and then it's kind of right at the end. You're like,
Yep.
no, it was this prevailing.
Right up when he strangles you in a
monster.
park.
So I'm going to break this down using a try-fail cycle now. And I'm pretty much going to use, I'll call it scene 2. So just at the end of the Batman movie, Carmine Falcone, one of the big Gotham bosses, is dead. And we have Penguin, who used to work for him. I'll call him Oswald because he's never referred to as the Penguin, really.
Sure.
Falcone had a loft kind of above the club where Oswald was the manager. And while the city is still recovering and in shambles from the flood, he's up there in this loft and he's just robbing the safe. He's just going to town, putting jewels in his pockets. So he clearly has a goal.
Just real quick, was that the Iceberg Club?
I think so. Yes, it was called the Iceberg that had the like 42 below darker club underneath it. Yes.
I think that's one of the few other connections they have from the old Hokey series is there is an Iceberg Club, Penguin, Iceberg. They managed to keep that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah, it was almost done in reverse order that it just happened to be called the Iceberg, but in no way had no relation to a man who was also nicknamed the Penguin.
No, but it's just like, if you know, you know.
I thought I did chuckle at the 42 below as a joke. I'm like, huh, that's funny. That's a degrees joke.
Yeah. That's a temperature.
Temperature. That's a temperature joke. So his goal is clearly everything we would expect him to be. That is he's grimy, he's slimy, he's an opportunist. This disasters happen. This man is dead, and the first thing he does is, this is my opportunity to put some jewels in my pocket. So it's just real low life behavior, but that's his goal. He wants to steal. He wants to rob him. Conflict happens when Alberto catches him in the act. Who is Alberto? Alberto is the son of the now deceased Falcone, and as we can put the pieces together, is the son in the position to inherit, like, leader of the Falcone business, the family, the mob. So it's only been about a week since his death. So this is a kid that's had about a week to reckon with his new position as the head of the family. He's got a gun on the back of Oswald's head. So in terms of our conflict, the next action Oswald takes is he tries to talk to Alberto, tries to talk his way out of it. And God help him, he actually succeeds. So when we get to see, and to go to our character sliders for a minute, we've already been given proof he's quite proactive, and audiences love proactive characters, even if they're shady. But as long as they're, like, set on their goals and achieving something, we will gravitate towards this as like gripping. It will engage us. So even though he's stealing jewels, he's doing this like days after this man is dead. So you kind of admire that, as we've communicated to the audience that he is proactive. But then he's immediately caught, gun to his head. This is like, we're 5 minutes into the show. So we get this sense of, but he's not completely competent. He is a little bit of a bubbling idiot. He hasn't done this with, a guard looking at the door or anything. He
makes some mistakes. Caught. Yeah.
He makes mistakes, which is so important to the plotting and try-fail cycles of the show, I reckon, that his competency slider is wildly all over the place. It is a seismograph that cannot stay still, and that's exciting to watch.
It feels very relatable as well. It's like a character in an action film when they don't take a punch. That's less relatable than the character when they do take some punches.
We don't want them always being.
Yeah,
I agree. But then he tries to talk his way out of it, and God help him, he does. He does manage to get Alberto to be like, "Hey, let's just go upstairs. Let's just grab a drink. I was just grabbing these jewels so no other, like, scummy person would come in and take these jewels. I wanted to make sure they got to you, Alberto, safely." And whether or not Alberto fully buys this, he goes, "Yeah, all right, it's a bit of crap week. Let's go upstairs and get some drinks." So that's actually a lovely moment of competency where, like, he actually did talk his way out of having a gun to the back of his head by being caught in the act of robbing some jewels. So we get the first sense of kind of his speech stat and his slick tongue, that he does have a way of talking. He can talk out of these situations.
Yes.
So the try-fail cycles are still going because he's not completely out of this situation. They're now just upstairs having drinks. And we see that he goes for a moment of manipulation where Alberto's kind of talking about how hard it is stepping into his father's shoes. Not sure he can step into his father's shoes. So there's an opportunity here for Oswald to ingratiate himself to who is going to be now the next most powerful man in Gotham. So he, if this was D&D, he tries a persuasion check. He counts his dice. He goes to tell us. He tries to manipulate him. And the story he tells is, when I was growing up kind of on the streets, there was this local gangster who, yes, he broke a few knees and, ran a few protection rackets, but if anyone ever threatened the local businesses, he would defend them. Yep. And he was like a real hero to the people in this street. And when he died, you know what all the people did in my street? We actually threw a parade for a gangster. This is the story he's telling.
Yeah. Well, importantly, I got the sense that he really did believe that as well. Like, I think he really did look up to that gangster as a child.
And I agree. But where I can start to split hairs on my second watch, so I think Hook, Line, and Sinker.
I've only seen it the once. Ooh.
Yeah, no, Hook, Line, and Sinker, I would have agreed with you on my first watch that you're like, cool, that's genuine. He thought this guy was great because he was for the underdog.
A man of the people.
A man of the people. He looked after the disadvantaged. Yes, he was a bad guy, but he did a lot of good.
Yeah.
So this philosophy, and in terms of context being revealed as the audience, you go, aha, this man has principles. Oswald clearly has a philosophy.
Yep.
He's not just robbing jewels because I'm a penguin and I like jewelry that we may have had in previous Batman iterations, but we're given an ideology to latch on to. So we're like, this is why this man does these things. What's really struck me on my second watch through is he may not truly believe this. I think what might be more appealing to Oswald is the adoration this man received for his actions. He was remembered. A parade was thrown in his honor. He is excited by the idea that this man did something great and was remembered by it.
That he was loved.
Feeds into
I
the
think you're
narcissist, like at the end of the day.
No, I think you are right about that,
And Alberto, though, makes the same conclusion the audience would conclude on a first watch through and goes, do you really believe that? Like, is that your ideology? You really want to be remembered? I don't think people are ever going to remember you, Oswald. You're a piece of crap. No one will ever love you. Like, essentially just, absolutely tears him down, essentially laughs in his face. And this isn't a spoiler, because keep in mind, this is scene 2 of the show. This is, in fact, the inciting incident. In response to being laughed at, Oswald pulls out his gun and shoots him.
Oh, well. Okay.
It's this wonderfully dramatic moment where Oswald gets to sit back and be proud of himself for like 3 seconds. That he's like, that felt good. The dickhead was laughing at me. I've shot him.
Yeah.
And then he goes, fuck, I've just shot the son and heir to the Falcone mob boss. And then it like cuts to black and it's like the penguin and then it's the title card. And so we have the stakes. The stakes are now immediately introduced that the whole season is going to now unfold because of Alberto Falcone's death. And so that is just a wonderful goal conflict disaster for me, in that just the goal of robbing the jewels, all the mini conflict moments that led us to then the disaster. Boom, we've shot Alberto.
And he also gets out of it in a way that ends up creating more problems for himself, which is good. Like, he solves the problem, but then he has also just murdered this guy and created all these other problems. Which is just his character.
That's what I mean by the tri-fail cycles. It'll never stop that he now has this problem. He's got to solve that, and it creates this problem. But what stops it from being a this, then this, then this, then this, which is a risk you can run into in episodic. Is the slow context reveals that we've been talking about that reorientate us, give us new information to view Oswald differently, feels like an escalation while the tri-fail cycles are happening, as well as the stakes shifting. So the stakes have just gone from, there's no boss, I can take some jewels, maybe I'll get caught, to I've just killed Alberto Falcone. So the stakes will continue to rise alongside the tri-fail cycles.
Just one other thing about that scene before we move on. From a character point of view, and I mentioned this to you earlier, Ali, what I love about that scene, is in the space of about, how long does that scene go for? 5 minutes or something?
Maybe to its credit, maybe it's 8 minits. It's a fairly long intro, but around that.
I was going to ask that. That's still a very dense 8 minutes. That's really nice.
Yeah, it's a really dense 8 minutes. They tell us everything we need to know about this character right from the beginning. That he's slimy, he's resourceful, but also, he wants, one of his key drives and needs is he needs to be loved. Like, the way he talks about this gangster and like, everyone loved him, everyone looked up to him. And you can see in his eyes, like, this is a man that deeply, deeply wants the respect and adoration of others, right? So there's his aspiration, there's his like drive, but also here's a man who absolutely cannot handle being mocked. He's incredibly proud, to the point where he just like shoots someone in cold blood for laughing at him. That is his entire character and everything that drives the man right there in the first scene of the show. So it's the best possible, what do you call the thing at the beginning of a book where you explain
like a prologue?
The setup? There we go. Best possible prologue, best possible setup that I can imagine for this character portrait.
So well done. And we just asked got to be gushing about the penguin, but it also gives us the button. And I'd been calling them buttons forever. I only read a book the other day that also called it a button. So that's now a technical term. We'll call it a button.
I like it.
If someone else presses it, we know this character will fly off the handle. So we now know that if he is not, the immediate response is like cold-blooded murder. We just know X equals Y. And because it's created that tension, we're always on edge that if we know the next time that line is crossed, that's
Yep.
where it's going to go.
And it's also this wonderful fulcrum on which any warmth and humanity you feel for him can suddenly turn on a dime. He can be being a reasonable person, but then the wrong thing happens, and suddenly you remember why he's actually a supervillain and not just like a dark hero.
One thing I love about a button, or what I would call that, is just like a rule. Like it's like
Yeah.
it gives the audience something to anchor into, and it holds
Yeah.
the author accountable, which
Yeah,
having the author
yeah.
accountable is something that really can anchor a viewer or a reader down, because it stops the author from just like, I could put anything on this page. It's like, no,
You've
you
established rules
established
for
a
yourself.
hard rule with
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
So you have to write within that rule. And if something like that happens, you have to write your way out of that, which makes it interesting.
Well, also, if it's a rule and you know the rule must be followed, every time there's a violation of that rule, or every time that rule comes up, like in the Penguin, every time someone makes fun of him, as the audience, you get to say, "Oh boy, oh, here
We
it
know
comes!"
exactly
like we know
where
what's going to
that's
happen,
going.
and that's so
And you could play
satisfying.
with that. Like, it doesn't always have to be violence. It could go internal. It could
Yeah, a character can't
build
lie,
pressure.
for
It
example.
could add tension.
Yeah, or a character's made a promise that they need to keep, and that. Yeah.
And on that, so I'll just take that scene back to sliders for a minute. So we've just seen the competency occur with, or he's convinced him to sit down with drinks, and the story of the gangster ups his likability slider. So until this moment, the likability slider hasn't really been touched. It's this moment of him giving the audience a philosophy, giving Alberto a philosophy, but it gives the audience, this is why I do what I do. You know, you're like, oh, okay, that likability slider goes up a little bit. And then by shooting Alberto, that's a very proactive act. So I think we instinctually go, oh shit, well, that was very proactive. So something in us enjoys that.
Yes.
Technically, I would call that a low competency moment, because he has then absolutely put himself in the shit. So we kind of get to laugh at, oh, he's done something very, very silly. But then also there's something about, I've heard it be called like a transgression fantasy, or the idea that this is something we like to embed into protagonists, is when they transgress, an audience likes it because we're like, oh, in my real life, I can't do that. That's the transgression of many societies' rules. But a protagonist in a story can transgress, and we get to like a cathartic release by watching that unfold.
I think that's what the entire Grand Theft Auto series is based on, right? Like that's the entire shtick of that.
It's plugging into some monkey brain. But yes, Oswald just shoots straight up killing someone who laughed at him for having an ideology, and you're like, there's something likable in that. So it just ticks up the likability slider. And I won't spend as much time on the next scene, but the next scene puts then all its eggs into likability. So while it paved the ground for competency and his proactivity, or like there's a little bit of humor, but not really in that scene. I'm watching it again today. It's his like trademark humor we'll get to know throughout the whole season starts in the next immediate scene, where he now has a body to hide, so he's dragging it along the floor. It's slapstick. There's now a massive set of steel stairs he's got to climb it down, and if you weren't aware, the show now brings attention to his foot, his disability, the club foot he has that doesn't let him walk really, doesn't have a lot of mobility, and gives him his famous kind of shuffle that the cartoon series is. He walks like a penguin. But suddenly seeing that in live action, it's not really something to laugh
it's not
at.
funny at all. And you're like, oh, geez, that's really mean.
But it plays it as a moment of his competency slider, because he sees these stairs that he's got to walk down. We get an idea that, stairs are not easy at the best of days, but now he's got a body over his shoulder. So he just grabs this body and hurls it down the stairs, which is an excellent moment of slapstick. And so it's humor is being used expertly to lower our guards. And again, it keeps tying back to this idea of that's just a 101 narcissistic trait as well, that narcissists are often very funny. They're charismatic, and he has that down to a T. That the show is exploiting that as an audience, we're like, that was actually really funny. Him throwing the dead body down the stairs. And then the next scene, his car is getting jacked by a bunch of kids.
Including...
That's where we meet Vic, and he's quipping the whole way through this scene. Like as he's like pulling out his gun and threatening these kids. I think I wrote down one of these lines. Well, like he's making jokes that he's like, "Oh, look, you work for me, or you know how it goes. I'll kill you and everyone you love." Like it's such just a flippant thing to say, but it's delivered as a comedy beat.
It's all in the delivery, and he is consistently really funny.
And a punch it home moment for the likability slider is so all the other kids get away, but Vic's the one that's get cornered while he's pulled out his gun, and Vic goes to plead for his life essentially, and he has a stutter. So the show has just drawn attention to the fact that Oswald has a disability. Cut to the next immediate moment. Then there's this kid who's obviously not, trying to lift rims off a car because he wants to, but he obviously has circumstances where he has to, and he's begging for his life, and he also has a disability. So it's nothing is ever said, but obviously Colin Farrell's acting his absolute butt off, and we can tell he sees himself in this kid. So there's a moment where he lets the kid live. He's like, "Oh, look, you work for me now," but it immediately ties back to this philosophy of the underdogs. We see him taking in an underdog. It's all just crashing together so rapidly. We're less than 15 minutes into this pilot, but all the key groundwork is being laid.
And we already have very complicated feelings towards this guy. Overall, we like him, but we seem to do some bad things, but we seem to like him despite that.
But the likability, it's almost like the likability slider is forefront. The whole second scene is about likability. The next scene after that is they're in the car, and this is our first taste of the dialogue is quippy and fun. Essentially, what do they talk about? Oswald's asking him if he's ever had slushies at a particular he's like, "Do you know this place down on the corner?" And he's like, have you ever mixed the flavors together? And even he just points out, he makes Victor drive his car, and he's like, "Look, I've got a new air freshener. It tastes nice. It tastes nice. It smells nice, doesn't it?" And Victor's like, "Yes, it smells nice." So it's now full into its comedy. And I was just in awe on the rewatch about how if the scene with Alberto was giving us competency and proactivity, then all the likability. It's almost like equal amount of screen time, if not more, is given to the likability. So that's just clear audience manipulation. You are whatever cursor ideas, prejudices, you could say that you've brought to the Penguin. If the cartoonish Penguin is all you had ever seen into this point, it is within 15 minutes, stripped those all away for you and given you a new character to latch on.
100%. I wasn't expecting to like it nearly as much, but I think you nailed it. They do, in retrospect, do so much to make us like him, while at the same time, they don't lie about who he is, but they manage to couch it in so much context that makes you think like, "Oh yeah, sure, surely." So there's never a deception. Sometimes when you'll
what
read
I
something,
really admire too. Yes.
Or watch something and you're like, "Oh, well, you just didn't give us the information." Like
yes.
it feels like they pulled the rug out under you with a character. This is never like that. The villainy was always right there. So when they do the switcheroo, for lack of a better term, it feels like, again, I'm going to use the term, a magic trick rather than you being cheated, like the contract's been broken.
Yes, I actually wrote that exact thing down in my notes, Paddy. I said when the full context of how he was as a kid is given, we're never lied to in the show. It's all of him being that cold, that narcissistic is all there.
Yeah. If you've seen the show, you'll know, but if you haven't, like once you see it, you'll know what we're talking about here. Like, oh boy.
It's just all it does is it manipulates us into making a judgment call about his character before all the facts are revealed. Yep. So it's just a masterclass. I'm going to keep using that word of drip feeding the correct contextual beats to an audience.
And that's it. It's contextual beats to then at the end recontextualize everything. And then suddenly the whole thing changes flavor.
Which one might argue is the very reason why you should use backstory and flashback. It's made me think about how I would reuse that tool. I'm like, that is obviously the most potent reason why you would use flashback is if you can if you can manipulate an audience's emotional judgment of a character with flashback. That's almost why you should be doing it. It's less about plot, but just the emotional journey the audience is on.
I actually had a question about flashback because I was curious when you brought up that there are a bunch of flashbacks. But really quick before then, because I give this note to a lot to people, especially with children's books, because your space is so limited and you have to be really tight with your words. You'll get a lot of people that introduce the story problem like 3 pages in on a children's book. So they don't have much space, and you're 3 pages in, or maybe even like 5 pages on a children's book until you get kind of what we're doing here. And you really want to try to get that on the first page, if not the second page. You kind of like first page, set up your scene a little bit, anchor them, and then give your problem on the next page, and so the audience is anchored in. That was a note I got at the beginning that I was like, so early? How do you even do that? And now it's a note I give all the time. But one thing that I really appreciated about that scene breakdown that just kind of reminded me about, like, get to the problem, show us what's going on, anchor the person in. That first 8 minutes and even subsequent like 8 minutes or whatever after that in scene 2 are so dense because it's pure showing. Like at no point the viewer is going to be so invested because they're not being told anything, they're just being shown events taking place and are making so many like just drop into place conclusions about this person. It's so easy that at the same time they're the ones making the conclusions and the prejudices and stuff. It's pure showing. Like, here's someone robbing. He shoots someone because they make fun of him. He doesn't need to say, I have a temperament issue, like, or anything like that. It's all right there.
That's a sensitive topic.
I have a temperament issue.
That's the thing I'm sensitive about.
That's great.
I think John Mulaney has a joke about that. But like, and that's just going to make it so engaging. And every single second is fighting for its place on the screen at that point. And that's what you want. You really like, what are we showing them in this particular moment? And obviously it doesn't need to be like a whole novel, every word's fighting for its place, but like when you're in your beginning of your book or your beginning of your show or something, you do need to be very economical with what is each thing doing and be very mindful about, I don't know, intentional.
Yeah.
100%.
I do have a quick question about the flashbacks. How often are they put it? Is it there's a flashback every episode, or is it not that measured, or do they come at the end of the episode or kind of sporadically?
My memory. So there's none in the pilot. I can say that with confidence, having watched it today. But I feel like they start introducing it as a structural tool probably from the next episode, because I think it does a good job of massaging the audience's expectation that this is a show that is going to dabble with a lot of flashbacks. Like, it's like, don't be scared of this technique. We're going to do it quite a lot. It's going to do it for Sophia. It's going to do it for Victor. Like, it's like an open call. All characters will be getting flashbacks. So it is a very important part of its structure, but you don't realize how important. Actually, it's plot important. The actual drug that becomes like the key thing all the mob bosses are fighting over is a drug that forces you to relive your memories. So this is again of like the theme being in conversation with the plot, that memories, reliving your worst memories, it's a really big part of Sophia's plot. That's why it's there. And it's the mother, so Oswald's mother, this drug is eventually used on her, and it's her retelling this story to Sophia drives like the very finale forward. So in that sense, flashbacks are woven in a really integral way that they never feel quite superfluous. But there's by about the third last episode, it is entirely flashback with Oswald and his mother. And by this point, like, we're like, what actually happened? There's too many questions around this. There's too many traumas around this. What happened that day? And that's the episode that tells us what happens that day. And that's the episode that will completely reframe our understanding of this man's psychology. As an audience, you get to feel like you've been incorrect on him, and then you're like, well, now I have no idea what he's going to do in the finale, and that is fantastic momentum.
So it sounds like the flashbacks are used to, it sounds like there if I'm correct in saying there's a plot line that's running through the flashbacks as well, that's also building to something.
In Oswald's flashback. Yes,
okay, because that's like a key thing to hold on to with flashbacks is it can't just be like a license to like, and now I'm going to take 5 minutes to tell you something that I didn't know how to show you or something. And like, or like, I didn't know how to, not I didn't know how to show you. Cause as we said in our last episode or a previous episode, there are times to tell and stuff, but it can't just be a license to be like, all right, now we got to get the boring stuff on. Now I got to give you
Yep.
some context. Now I got to give you some stuff. So flashback time, sit back. This information is necessary, but I promise it'll be over soon. It's like it's part of the plot. It's leading you somewhere. Essentially, if you took the word flashback out, you could just look at them as other characters in the same show.
Well,
like
yeah.
meanwhile, in the past, like
And a lot of the time, the flashbacks had their own stakes and their own little arcs. So
Exactly.
it didn't
Yeah.
feel like just like, here's a dump of information, do what you will.
Yep.
It felt like a little episode running alongside the main episode. And also,
Yep.
crucially, the flashbacks come once they've made us invested in the
them.
characters. I never saw a
Right.
flashback. Sometimes you see a flashback and something like, I don't care. Like, I
Yeah.
don't care about this character enough to know why they have the childhood trauma.
Yes.
You
A good bit
care
of-
at the point that they drop it.
A good bit of advice I was given is you deliver the flashback once you've teased an audience enough that they're demanding that context.
Right.
And I think this
Yeah.
does that well, being like, what happened
That's
that
good.
day? Why is that person like same? Like Sophia's maybe aren't done as masterfully as Oswald's are, but there's also like something clearly happened with Sophia's mother, and it mentions this again and again. So by that point, you're, as an audience, they're like, oh, like what happened to the mother? Tell me,
Yep.
and then it finally tells you. So it teases that moment until you actually want to go back in time and know what happened. And I think that's a
Yeah.
good trick to a flashback. You got to make the audience want the answers, then give them, not just suddenly give them
I
answers
really like
and have
that.
be like, why are you telling me this?
I feel like every episode we do, there's like a takeaway of the episode. The thing that makes people go like, oh, that's good. That for me right there is good. Like don't give the flashback until the audience is gagging for it, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
That and it's also just not an excuse. Just because you're flashing back doesn't mean it's an excuse to disengage from storytelling techniques.
Yes.
It's not your license to just like, and flashback card, now I get to give you information. It's like, no, you're still bound to all your rules,
Yep.
all your storytelling
Yep.
structures. Like, weave it in, make it count. It sounds like Penguin does that very well.
And I
Yeah, it
guess
really does.
ultimately we've done a good job of talking around it, so I'll continue to talk around it. But Victor, and talking to a lot of people who are writers or story savvy who watch The Penguin, we identify Victor early on as someone who is a morality potato, because this is a trope that's we call it a morality potato. I don't know if that's the real word for it, but
Oh,
someone
that's definitely the real term. Yeah.
you're like, if something happens to this character, like you kind of know the plot's coming for them. They've become too important. Say the protagonist becomes too attached to them. You're like, oh, wouldn't it be bad if the morality potato got shot? Like that suddenly they become a target for all emotional investment. And very early on, that's Victor. It's like, oh no, he accidentally adopted a kid. And this is happening very early on. Wouldn't it be something if something happens to Victor? And it plays with those expectations. You know, this kid might not be long for the world, but the question becomes how.
We're not saying anything happens to Victor.
No,
This
and
is
then
not the
Victor's
spoiler.
fine.
There's many twists
I
in the
love
show,
it.
and one of them might be around Victor. So just keep that in mind, okay? We're not spoiling Victor's.
But the reframing of Oswald, which is done through the flashbacks, fundamentally changes your expectations with, well, then what's going to happen to Victor? Like, if that's been the question you've had the whole time, because it's not even trying to hide really that something's going to happen to that kid, but it's the how it'll happen suddenly becomes very juicy and exciting.
Yeah.
Mm.
Folks, we could continue on talking about the Penguin for more. I have quite a few notes on this as well, but we may even address this in a second part episode if we feel like it, because we can, because that's our prerogative. If you haven't seen the Penguin, see it. It's so good. I actually do have some qualms with about midway through the series, which we didn't get to, but that aside, I mean, if nothing else, watching it for the character of the Penguin and how they explore this character and how they kind of gaslight you with this character is a beautiful thing to watch. It's Phoenix, go watch the Penguin. We're looking at you. You, buddy.
You have sold me.
Right.
Where is it available?
In Australia, it's on Binge, so I have no idea what that means for you.
Okay.
Wherever HBO stuff is available, I guess.
Okay.
And with that, we're going to round this out. Folks, thanks once again for joining us. This has been our long spiel on Je Penguin. If you'd like to hear more of what we do, obviously we've got 100 other episodes by now, which is a strange thing to say.
Over
But
100.
here we are.
You can. What a nice thing to be able to say.
I
It's just so
know.
clean.
Back in seasons 2 and 1.
Yeah.
And we also, because we are writers, we have an anthology called The New Mythic. It is an anthology of science fiction, fantasy, and horror, because that's what we write. We're speculative fiction authors. You can get it in paperback, you can get it in digital format, and you can get it as a very, very fine audiobook, which,
Mhm.
I mean, Phoenix, can you attest to
I've
the
been
quality of the
listening to it
audiobook?
recently.
Yeah.
It's very good. Like I've very much so been enjoying it. And I know I'm the most biased person in the world, but like genuinely, I've been enjoying it very much. And I've read these stories so many times, so you
The
know
point
it's
you
good
should hate
because
them.
yeah,
But
exactly.
Rupert
Like,
Degas's dulcet tones just make it all.
oh
that
my
much better,
gosh,
don't they?
his performance
Oh,
is
he's really
so
good.
good. He's so good. Nathan as well. They're both with both of them. There were these moments where they flip into a character, and I had that special moment where I forgot who I was listening to. Like Rupert did one voice where I was just like, Rupert left. Don't know who that is. That's someone else right there.
Yeah.
And Nate had someone as well who he jumped in with someone. I was like, whoa, like Nathaniel, where'd you go?
Shout out to Nathan as well. You may have noticed that we have a new intro. We have a new introduction, and this one are recorded by Nathan, Ali's lovely husband.
Mhm.
He does a lot for us behind the scenes. We don't give him nearly enough credit,
Mhm.
so thank you, Nathan. You are the real.
Thank you,
You are
Nathan.
the real MVP.
Shadow Precipice by default.
Yeah, he is the seventh
Yeah.
Precipice.
Mhm.
If you have enjoyed today's episode, please give us a like and review. It's the only way that the algorithm really notices us. We'll be back again next fortnight. And to cap things out, Ali, what were the pros of the penguin?
It was a masterful manipulation of the audience.
That it was. And Phoenix, what were the cons of the penguin?
It doesn't have any fucking penguins in it.
0
Yeah.
stars, no penguins
No,
in the
it
penguin.
did. It didn't have any penguins.
No.
Thanks very much. This has been great, and we'll be back with you next fortnight for more nuggets of Rattingly wisdom.
Bye-bye.
Precipice out.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.